You are listening to the podcast Voices for Mental Health. Real people, real stories, real hope. I'm your host, Candace, and today I am looking forward to talking to Casey Oakley, a wife and mother of 2 boys and surrogate journey coordinator, about the process of surrogacy, the legal issues, and more. Welcome, Casey, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. How are the boys at home?
Wild. This rain has been cooping them up, so they are definitely hyper. But we went to go see a movie yesterday, and it was really nice.
Yeah, what movie did you see?
The Wild Robot.
Oh, I want to see that. Now, how old are the boys?
They are almost 4. Next week he'll be 4 and 5.
Wow.
Yeah, super close in age.
That must be nice for them and for you.
It is.
So, my first question is maybe the obvious one. What is surrogacy? Can you explain it to our listeners?
Yeah, of course. There's 2 different types of surrogacy. There's gestational surrogacy and traditional surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy uses the IVF process to implant somebody else's egg and sperm, embryo, into your uterus as a surrogate. Traditional surrogacy uses your own biological matter, so the surrogate's own egg, so she is actually biologically related to the child. That type of surrogacy is actually being phased out, and most commonly used surrogacy is gestational surrogacy. So we use IVF to obtain a pregnancy using somebody else's genetic material.
Why is the traditional being phased out?
Because we have people who have sperm and egg donors, and they can pick who they want genetic material from.
So people are you saying, what I'm hearing you say, and maybe I'm interpreting it based on what I would think, is that people are not so attached to having some of their own genetic material and passing those genes down?
That's correct. So, or let's say somebody lost their reproductive organs, like their eggs and whatnot, to cancer, and they no longer have those eggs. So they've decided to either have somebody they know donate eggs to them, or they go through an egg bank and have their eggs and somebody else's sperm make embryos.
So, speaking of egg banks, do you have any clue, and I did not do the research on this and I don't know why, but this just came up as our conversation, is how many are out there?
There's a lot of egg banks out there. I don't know the exact number, but there's definitely a lot of options for egg banks.
Do you know if there's one at least in every state?
I don't know that.
Okay, just because we are a national show, I'd like to try to share that information with our listeners.
Of course.
So, I guess one of the other obvious questions is, when and why did you become a surrogate yourself?
After I had my last pregnancy with my keeper, my little boy, I met a surrogate, and surrogacy had never been on my mind. It kind of found me. She had a lovely journey through surrogacy, and I thought, this is something I can do. I've had really easy pregnancies, minimal complications, and I really enjoyed being pregnant. So then I really started doing a lot of research, about 6 months worth of research on the topic, and decided this is something that I could do for another family. So that's what led me to surrogacy.
I mean, talk about the greatest gift that you can give somebody. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, it definitely, it helped my family, it helps their family. So there was really no downside to it in my eyes.
Did you feel that when you were telling people your story that you were being judged for doing it?
Yeah, sometimes that does happen. I try, education is a very powerful tool. So anytime that somebody questions it, whether it's a moral issue or geared more towards religious, I always like to remind somebody that if they have their own children, that's a blessing to be able to have your own biological children, and I think that that's a right that anybody else has.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I assume you had a conversation. You're married, which
Yes.
I said in the intro, and you have 2 boys.
Mm-hmm.
What did your spouse think when you brought it up?
He was shocked. Yeah, he was shocked.
I would have been.
Yeah, I mean, up till this point, I had almost never heard of surrogacy up till 6 months before that, and now I was bringing it to this man who very much loves me, and I very much love him, and saying, I would love to carry a baby for another couple, somebody else's biological material. That's a time commitment. That's, there's a lot of different things that go into surrogacy during the screening. There's a period of abstinence too. So everybody has to be on board very much with this process. He has to go through his own psychological evaluation.
Oh, he does? Okay.
He does, and blood screening panel as well. So yeah, to make sure that there's no sexually transmitted diseases between either of us. So he had to be a very active participant. This is not something that can just be a passive, part of him. He has to be in complete agreement and supportive of it.
So let me ask you this, as a coordinator.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know the qualifications to being a surrogate and also being a surrogate yourself.
Yeah.
What are those qualifications? Because the one thing that came to mind when you were talking about his involvement is, do you need to be married?
No, you do not need to be married. You don't need to have a spouse. You don't need to have a partner. But if you do, then that's absolutely fine to have a spouse or a partner. They would have to be screened, just like my partner and spouse was. But there's no qualification for needing to be coupled with somebody.
And what are some of the other, because I imagine health comes into play as well.
Absolutely. So you have to be cleared for surrogacy by your OBGYN. So we would pull all of your records for your prior births. You have to have had prior births, successful births, in order to be a surrogate. They have to be little to no complications throughout those pregnancies and deliveries. You have to be under the age of 41. In most clinics to be a gestational surrogate, and then in good mental health, and then have a great support system too. That's very important. Even if you don't have somebody who is you're partnered with, we would really hope that you would have family involvement, because you're going to have to travel some to the intended parents' clinics, so you would have to have a support system for your children.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
right. Was all of your family on board, not just your spouse and your children, but I assume your parents are still living?
Yes, they are. So both my in-laws and my parents are very supportive of our family and our pursuit with surrogacy, and they're very happy with it. And we've definitely all gained some additional family because of it.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it is. And I think this has really opened. For my first journey, I carried for a same-sex couple, and my parents really. It opened their eyes so much to a same-sex couple, and that they are very similar to my husband and I, and their want for a family. So
That's fantastic.
yeah.
I guess I'm wondering, because we're talking about mental health and making sure you're mentally stable or you're in good spirits or whatever, and people get postpartum.
Yes.
Which is a mental health issue after the fact.
It is.
So with each pregnancy, whether it's your own or with a surrogacy, and obviously podcast is about surrogacy,
Yeah.
was that ever a factor, and how did you handle the ups and downs?
Absolutely. So to be a surrogate, you can't have had a history of postpartum depression. Since that it's a prerequisite for being a surrogate. We need you to be in a really sound place mentally to proceed with surrogacy. However, it's situational. It happens after birth, and so that very much could happen with a surrogacy birth. There is a thing in place in your contract to allow you to get mental health services. The intended parents would want you to seek out help if you needed help. But this is all a very upfront process. You know that the baby is going to be going back to the parents when you have the baby. You're very mentally prepared for that. But that's kind of the situation there.
How is that process of, I can't think of another term, of passing the baby on to the parents?
So I thought it was very beautiful. I knew coming into it that this baby was not my baby. It wasn't biologically mine. So I knew she was going back to the parents the whole time. That was the goal. They were in the delivery room I watched love happen. I actually watched them fall in love, which was really nice.
Don't make me cry.
With my own births, I was watching the baby, and I was so excited about the baby. But with this birth, it was so different because I was watching the parents.
Right.
And I watched them set eyes on their little girl for the first time. And that was so special to me because I actually watched them the first time they ever saw their daughter. And that made so much difference, and it made the whole process worth it. And I realized that this is what I wanted to share with the whole world about surrogacy, and this is what we're striving for in surrogacy, is ethical, meaningful connections.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But, and I've never been pregnant. We've had this conversation in our pre-interview. I've never had a child, so I don't know what that's like. But from everything I've read and seen, there's always some sort of maternal, motherly instinct to be attached to the child that you're carrying. I mean, I can't imagine that you wouldn't have any kind of attachment.
Right. So my attachment came with her family. So throughout our whole journey, I was becoming so connected to her parents, and we were growing our relationship. Instead of my relationship with the baby, instead of talking to the baby, they would send me recordings of them reading stories in their own language. They're bilingual. So they would sing songs to her and send me recordings, and I'd put it up to my belly and let her, because after a certain point she could hear them. So I would make sure that she knew their voices. And she did. I was able to see that when I gave birth to her and they started speaking to her, it looked like she recognized their voices.
Wow.
So I thought that was, they were able to have that connection with their daughter, and it didn't have to be me. So,
now, as a coordinator,
yes.
and I do want to get back, we're going to talk about the finances involved because I think a lot of people have questions about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But going back to your personal experience and the coordinating other surrogacies,
yeah.
are the stories that you hear from the moms, the surrogates, similar to yours? I mean, I assume that not all of them have rosy outcomes. I wish that they were.
Oh, absolutely. So some of them have stories just like mine, and they keep going to have numerous surrogacy journeys. We have a surrogate that is with my company worldwide, and she keeps coming back. She's had 4 journeys.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. So it's wonderful, and it's a great feeling to help somebody else and to help another family achieve something they can't do for themselves. So
what are the financials implications?
Yeah.
Because I think there is a lot of myths about that, and are people having babies for other people for money? So could you clarify and give us some information on that, some facts?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now in the United States, you're looking at a base compensation at about $60,000, and this is not at birth, and they're not paying you for a baby. They're paying you for the pregnancy, to carry their child. There's a lot of risk involved with pregnancy to your own life, your own fertility. You have to go through shots in the IVF process. That's every single night. You have to do probably at least 3 shots at some point in your journey. That's a lot of needle usage, and then a lot of time with all the appointments you're going to, in addition to the birth. So you're reimbursed expenses for those 9 months when you're pregnant.
So I'm going to get into the nitty gritty here.
Yeah, of course.
When you're reimbursed for those expenses, so that's all your medical bills, all your travel,
yes.
hotels.
And that's part of ethical surrogacy in the United States. So the surrogate is not out of pocketing anything. There's a contract in place outlining every fee that you're entitled to during that pregnancy, saying who's responsible for what, which the intended parents are going to be responsible for all of the bills to make sure that nothing comes up, there's no harm done to the surrogate, and if there is harm that's unintended, that your family is going to be in a good place, even if that happens.
Okay, so on the same line of thinking on the financial aspect of it.
Yes.
So those who can afford surrogacy are more likely to have it, because I guess this is something that a lot of people cannot afford.
Correct. This is something a lot of people don't afford, but some people do. We have school teachers who are looking into surrogacy, and school teachers I don't think are fairly compensated at all. So these people will take out loans, personal loans, loans against retirement accounts in order to have a child that's biologically related to them. So it's not just for famous people. These are, these are everyday individuals who are just trying to have their own biological child.
Yeah. Have you ever had a complication in pregnancy up to this point?
I actually have all C-sections. All my births are
Okay.
C-sections. So my first baby was about 9 pounds and 6 ounces, and that resulted
Big.
a big baby. That resulted in a C-section. Every birth thereafter, for me at least, has been a C-section, just a repeat C-section. So personally, there hasn't been any complications with my births. So
Wonderful, wonderful.
yeah, yeah.
So what would you, if you were in my seat asking a question to a surrogate or coordinator, what would be the one question you'd want to ask and answer?
What keeps you doing it again? Knowing all the risks.
That's an excellent question. So let me turn that around. What keeps you from doing it again, knowing the risk?
The feeling that I knew I have with every first my children have. I know that I'm gifting that to somebody else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when we started preparing for my children's first Christmas, losing their first teeth, all the magic that comes with every milestone, I'm finding that and I'm giving it to somebody else. And that's what keeps me coming back. And then that look I was telling you about when I birthed the baby and it was very clear they fell in love with her immediately. That's definitely what kept me coming back. And then also having a contract in place that knows that I'm protected, my family is protected, even with the risks in place, makes me feel very confident and comfortable moving forward.
So the contract aspect,
Yes.
is that a family planning lawyer, or what kind of
Yes.
lawyer do you hire for this?
So yes, it is going to be an artificial reproductive technology attorney, and we do contract negotiations. I have my own private attorney, and then the intended parents have their own private attorney, and everyone works that way. So that way everything stays very separate and ethical, and that nobody is on the same side as anybody.
You keep mentioning the word ethical, which I like, and I think it's
Yes.
very well warranted in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to the naysayers?
I'd say I'm benefiting just as much, and my family's benefiting just as much, where the people who say that this isn't an ethical thing to do and that I'm being taken advantage of and I'm exploited. Surrogates have to be financially stable. We can't receive public assistance in the United States and still be a surrogate. We
Great
have
point.
to jump through hoops of fire just to be here and be a surrogate. We have to go through the medical screening
Right.
and the psychological screening. We have to have blood tests and blood draws, and somebody has to come and do a home check and a background check on my family. It is such an intimate process, and it's not something that you can just wake up one day and decide, I'm going to be a surrogate. You have to qualify for these things, and somebody has to pick you.
How long is the process, generally speaking?
For screening,
Correct.
probably about 2 to 3 months.
And then after that 2 to 3 months, and you said there's a coordinator or a journey coordinator, you match surrogates with families?
Yes. So after we go through the screening process with the surrogate, and that's preliminary screening. So that's their background check, the insurance check, bunch of other things. So after we do that, we match somebody with an intended parent who's on the wait list, and then they have to go through another medical screening with that intended parent's fertility clinic.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they could still technically fail screening after that for any reason. Like, let's say they have numerous polyps that could prevent implantation. They don't have a lining that's thick enough for IVF. So this is a drastic time investment away from your family too, for all of these medical testing. So that's why ethical.
And are those expenses covered up to that point, even if they are not able to be a surrogate?
Yes, those are all covered.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. And that's why it's really important. And it's really important to put this information out there, because then we have people who are talking about the ethics of surrogacy and how it is unethical, when it's quite the opposite. We have protections in place for the surrogates. We have protections in place for the intended parents. And so there's that.
And we've talked about IVF as one of the, right now, the principal way of doing this.
Yes.
I'm sure everybody in the country knows there's a question as to whether that's going to be feasible in the future, given
Mm-hmm.
the political climate, shall we say. What are your thoughts on that?
It's so sad. It breaks my heart. You're taking away somebody's access to have a family for themselves, for surrogates. It's not just about those people. It's once again, I task everybody with thinking about who has their own biological children. What happens if they weren't there? What happens if there was no access? You know, you've missed out on every first your child's going to have. If all that got taken away from you, how would you feel if you never had a start? You know, so it's emotional to think about.
It is, and I can see you're emotional about it and passionate about it, and your organization is very lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you so much.
What you do.
I'm so lucky to have them. This is truly a passion, has spilled over into a career for me, and yeah, worldwide surrogacy has definitely given me that.
So what is worldwide? Do you do any international?
So we have international intended parents, but all of our surrogates are here within the United States. So people come to the United States seeking out ethical surrogacy from the United States.
Okay, but now we're talking about, are they in the United States legally?
Oh, yes. So
Okay.
they are living, let's say, in the United Kingdom, and they have their surrogate in the United States, but their embryos are also in the United States. So their embryos were created with a clinic within the United States. So they'll come over for the birth and in any appointments that they want to come in for, and then there's still a relationship where you text them back and forth and video calls during appointments, and yeah.
Talk about video calls, since that's technology, and technology has changed greatly in my lifetime and your lifetime. You're much younger. Has that had an impact on the number of people who are looking towards surrogacy, do you think?
I don't think so, but access to IVF, it has had an impact on surrogacy, and it has taken us from traditional surrogacy to gestational surrogacy. So IVF has paved the way for that to even exist.
Right, right.
So.
I mean, it's a very complex subject, I think.
It is, and it definitely comes under scrutiny in numerous different religions. The Pope has just this year talked about surrogacy and painted it in a negative light, so saying that it exploits surrogates.
And I was going to ask you about your religious background, or most surrogates, because obviously that is where you get a lot of criticism.
Yeah, I would say most of the surrogates I work with are Christians, which makes it so hard to see a leader in a community of Christianity demonize it. It's sad.
Well, and especially, and I'm not a very religious person, so I don't know very much about it, but from what I recall, Catholics promote birth and pregnancy and babies and all that.
Right.
So is there, in my mind, I think that would be sort of a conflict or a...
Yeah, it does seem, it's very confusing. It's very, very confusing when the goal is, you know, more children, more loved children, and there's people seeking out, you know, women to have children so that they can love them. And they're so wanted here in this world. And I can tell you right now that my prior intended parents that I had a baby for, that child is so loved, so cared for, so privileged, and her parents absolutely adore her. So I don't know how anybody could actually look or meet with a family who has children born by a surrogate and say that they're undeserving.
Now, are you in contact with all of your families?
I am. Yep.
And how many times have you done this for, am I right?
So I've done one completed journey. I'm in the process of doing another one currently. So.
Oh, two, okay.
Yeah.
Would you say that more people than not that do it the first time want to do it again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is. It's amazing. As long as they don't have any pregnancy complications, they generally will come back and do another journey.
And you say there's a wait list of families looking?
Yeah, there is. And it's pretty drastic too. I mean, there's far more intended parents than there are surrogates in the world, or people who qualify to be surrogates.
So someone who's considering being a surrogate, is there reading material, websites, books that you would recommend?
So Victoria Ferrara wrote a book, A Gestational Guide for Surrogacy, and it kind of explains all the steps, the screening, up to the finances. It's a great book for both intended parents and surrogates to look at the process and see if this is for them in the first place. There's plenty of Facebook groups that you can go on where you don't have to buy any reading material at all, and just that's what I chose to do, and just sit in those groups for a few months and start learning the language. There's a lot of acronyms in surrogacy. So if you start learning those, seeing people's different experiences, knowing what to put in your own personal contract to make sure that you and your family are protected, how long timelines are going to take, just going in and having all of those expectations from your journey.
You say your own personal contract, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking legally
Yes.
that there would be boilerplate language.
So
What would be something that would be outside that, quote, what I'm going to call boilerplate language?
Okay, so every single state has different rules and regulations to surrogacy, what you need in it. They also have different price points when it comes to, if I need a babysitter, maybe childcare in my area is going to be higher than somebody else's area. So instead of using, like in Virginia, maybe instead of putting $10 an hour for 2 children, no one's going to want to watch my children
Right.
when I'm gone. So I would have to make that adjustment in my own contract to say, actually, it's not $10 an hour here in Virginia, just outside of Charlottesville.
Right.
It's probably more like 20. So
Very interesting. Yeah. So it's very detailed, it sounds like.
very, very detailed.
I mean, it sounds like to the dot on the I's and crossing the T's.
Yes, the contract
So-
generally goes back and forth several times between attorneys, just making small little details, but sometimes the small details end up being big things.
But does that also add to your stress as a surrogate?
I wouldn't think so, because I know in the end the contract is there to protect me and my family, so I take it very seriously, as most surrogates should.
Absolutely, absolutely. So where can someone go to contact you or the World Surrogacy Group?
So it's going to be C. Oakley at worldwidesurrogacy.org. So you can contact me there. My name's Casey Oakley, and my number is 757-969-7154. I'm willing to talk to anybody about my experience with surrogacy, whether that be intended parents just looking for more information about what they need to look for in a surrogate, what should we do to have a good relationship with our surrogate. Some people, when they are intended parents, don't know how to talk to their surrogate, how to get to know them. They might have just gotten matched, and they don't know how to just make the initial reach out. Like, this is the woman who's going to be carrying your baby.
That would be so...
It's intimidating.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
so intimidating. And the same thing, the surrogate feels the exact same way. They're like, I'm new to this. This is something I want to do. I've just gotten matched with them. I've just met them, possibly, if you don't know the intended parents. And they just don't know how to have those icebreaker conversations.
Well, speaking of conversations, we are out of time.
Okay.
It was a pleasure talking to you about this. Learned
Thank you.
so much. I hope the audience has learned a lot as well.
Yeah.
You're a great spokesperson for this topic.
Oh, thank you.
And to our audience, remember, you're not alone.